What would drive a weary war veteran to buy a house everyone called haunted? Why would he risk his last savings on a place the whole town feared to enter? And how did his loyal dog, Rex, sense what no human ear could hear, leading him straight to a secret buried for 100 years? This isn't just a story about a haunted house. It's a story about trust, redemption, and the mystery that left an entire town stunned. Before we begin, where are you watching from? Drop your country below. Let's see how far one act of kindness can go. Evening mist pooled at the tree line as wind fingered the grass. Low clouds pressed on the ridge, and the wet breath of pine drifted over the old road. The weather felt like a memory that refused to move on. Ethan Miller guided his battered pickup along the gravel, hands firm on the wheel, though the lane was straight. The grip was habit, not need. The leftover choreography of a man who had spent years waiting for the worst. Even out of uniform, he carried himself like a soldier, back set, gaze skimming hedges and fences, measuring angles, exits, cover. He was early 40s, tall, whittled lean by long seasons of sleep that never quite arrived. Brown hair, cut short out of reflex, showed gray at the temples. The hazel of his eyes had a watchfulness that neither friendliness nor fatigue could soften. What shaped him most was a single bright shard of the past, a roadside blast on a sun-shot afternoon. 2 boys under his command, a call he gave that led them into fire. He wore that day the way other men wore wedding rings, constant, unignorable, part of the hand. Since then, trust had felt expensive, and conversation felt like a tool he no longer needed. He preferred wood and steel, the honest grammar of things that either held or failed. The only creature who never asked him to be more than he could be sat in the passenger seat. Rex, a 6-year-old German shepherd, big through the chest and clean in his lines, sable dark along the spine and tan at the flanks. One ear had a neat nick, and a pale crescent scar traced his left forepaw, faint relics of shrapnel from the same day that rewrote Ethan. Service had taught Rex obedience. Living beside Ethan had taught him fluency. He could read the jump of a jaw muscle, the stutter of breath that meant a nightmare had hooked deep, and he answered with presence, pressing his warm weight against Ethan's shin, or laying his head on the man's boot with a steadying patience that sometimes felt like grace. His amber eyes were clear and disarming, the kind that seemed to keep a man honest by simply looking. Havenwood, when it appeared, wore its caution openly. The town crouched between firs and the rib bones of old mills, a place that prided itself on trimmed hedges and unremarkable afternoons. At the cafe, people paused their quiet talk when Ethan walked in, not hostile, just weighing him like weather, might pass, might not. He didn't blame them. Some men carried a noise around them you couldn't quite hear. He had learned to keep his distance so they wouldn't feel obliged to keep theirs. The bell above the door in the real estate office had jingled with a meekness that didn't suit the place. Mr. Evans, the sole realtor in town, rose from behind a desk crowded with folders. He was in his 60s, neat as a ledger line, thinning white hair carefully parted, glasses riding the precipice of his nose, a tie that had seen more practicality than style. He had the manner of a man who respected the worst-case scenario and taught it table manners. "Most folks want something near town," he had said, flipping through photographs of kitchens that smelled like fresh paint. The hand hesitated over a manila folder. When he spoke again, the name came out careful, as if he were stepping around a place where ice thinned. "We do have the Blackwood place. It's very inexpensive." He didn't say why. He didn't have to. In towns like Havenwood, certain nouns came preloaded. People said footsteps. People said voices. They said lights when no one was home, and in the same breath they said don't. The photograph showed a farmhouse that time had argued with, and mostly won. Roof slumped, shutters askew, a porch that didn't so much lean as sigh. The yard was a pelt of moss and stubborn weeds. A rusted chain hung from the porch beam, the ghost of a swing that had once hauled summer into the air for a child who now belonged to another century. Pinned to the corner was the price, and it was the first merciful number Ethan had seen in a long while. "Cheap," Evans offered, with a softness that didn't soften anything. "But folks don't last long there." He cleared his throat and added, like a man who would not swear but could not keep from warning, "Stories." To another buyer, the photo would have been the end of the conversation. For Ethan, it was the beginning. He recognized the physics of a broken thing, how weight settled, where stress ran, what might hold if you gave it structure and the courtesy of time. He could not unmake what the blast had made of him, but he could choose a ruin that consented to be mended. And there was the simple math. His savings thinned to bone, disability pay steady, but spare. The Blackwood place was the only roof he could afford that wasn't a lie. He felt no romance in the purchase. He felt alignment, a quiet fit between a man and a task. By the time the truck left the last line of firs and the house stepped into view, the photograph seemed like flattery. Up close, the roof was a chessboard, missing too many squares. One window had cracked into a spider's web. Another gaped, toothless. The siding bloomed green with lichen. The porch boards cupped up at the edges like old fingers lifting to be counted. Somewhere inside, loose tin ticked a slow metronome in the wind. The smell reached him first, damp timber, dust, the papery ache of old books left to think in the dark. Ethan killed the engine and sat a beat in the wider quiet, listening to the cooling tick of metal. Then he stepped out, boots taking the moss's soft argument, and stood still as he measured like a man setting a perimeter. Roof, windows, porch stringers, chimney lean. Triaging gave him back a rhythm he trusted. Work was a language he could still speak without harming anyone. Rex jumped down and came smoothly to his side. No bark, no fuss. Ears high, tail low, head up to taste the air. He tracked the lines of the house as if scent alone, could read blueprints. Then he glanced up, and the glance said what it always said. I'm with you. Ethan's hand found the warm, thick fur between the ears and stayed there a moment, drawing a steadiness he pretended was his own. Evan's sedan arrived in a fussy cough of gravel and idled like it wasn't sure it wanted to be here. Up close, the realtor smelled faintly of pipe tobacco and laundry starch, little domestic anchors against the uneasy story they were all standing in. He set a leather folder on the hood of the pickup and arranged papers with a care that might have been superstition. I'll be honest, he said, pen balanced like a divining rod. I wouldn't take this place for free, but it has bones. If a man had patience. His eyes, magnified by the glasses, flicked to the eaves where a wasp nest clung like a thought that wouldn't leave. Neighbors keep their distance out here. I prefer distance, Ethan said. The words came low and even, smoothed by disuse. Evans gave the number another small, hopeless tap, but Ethan had done the arithmetic until the sums were muscle memory. He slid the envelope across, bills stacked with the precision of locker inspection, the last honest heft of his years. Signing took seconds. The pen scratch sounded too loud in the quiet, as if the house were listening. Deed transferred, risk adopted, mission accepted. They shook hands, two practical men acting out an old ritual in a place rituals avoided. As he climbed back into the sedan, Evans didn't quite look at the house, the way a person avoids looking directly at an animal they've been told not to feed. The car reversed down the lane until the firs swallowed it. The clearing fell back into its habitual silence. Ethan stood with the folder tucked under his arm. Wind worried the rusted chain, and the porch answered with a tired groan. He could feel the town at his back even out here, the conversation over counters, the shrugging pity, the word crazy floating like chaff. It did not change the thing in front of him. Broken was still fixable. Cheap was still payable. And belonging, for a man who had outlived comrades and outlasted promises, might begin with a ruin that asked for nothing but work. He looked down at Rex. The dog sat like a vow, eyes bright, ears forward, whole body tuned to one frequency. His. To the town, Ethan was a fool spending his last coins on a bad story. In Rex's gaze, he was still what mattered, the center line in a world of static, the man worth following. Ethan breathed in the cold, bookish smell of the place, the wet bark, the damp nail heads. The house did not welcome him, and it did not reject him. It simply waited. That he understood. He set his palm to the nearest porch post, felt the tired pulse of the wood, and let purpose settle into his bones. The house was cheap. The house was cursed. The house was his. Night came down like a lid, and the first cold of it slid beneath the doorframes while the trees whispered to one another beyond the field. Ethan spread a canvas tarp over the least sagging stretch of floor in the front room and set his bedroll on top, lantern crouched beside him like a tame son. He had hauled in a toolbox, a thermos, 2 cans of chili, and enough stubbornness to last until morning. Somewhere in the house, a scrap of tin clicked at Wynn's command, and then he heard it, the sound he would later try to name and never manage fully, a low-leveled hum, as if the earth itself had chosen a single note and refused to leave it. It did not come from the lantern. He snuffed the flame, and it went on. It did not come from the electric lines. He had flipped the main breaker as soon as he found the box, and the hum continued, patient as water. It was under things, inside wood and bone, not a sound so much as a pressure you felt first in your teeth and only after in your ears. For a long minute he sat with his hands on his knees and let memory do what the sound had invited it to do. A generator far away, the thump of rotor blades flattening a sky too hot to hold them. The quicksilver silence before a blast takes all the air and every instruction you were ever given and shreds it. His mouth dried, his heart, disciplined to keep quiet, began to step wrong. He did what he had been taught long ago. He measured. Ethan crawled the floor with a carpenter's pencil and a mason's patience, pressing his palm to the boards and listening through skin, the way a man listens to an old clock for the shape of its failure. The hum grew stronger near the interior wall that faced the backyard, a long run of paneling that had once been handsome before weather etched its slow arithmetic into the grain. He traced rough X's on the plank where the vibration announced itself most plainly. Rex shadowed him, claws ticking softly, head low, ears triangulating in the kind of slow, exact movements a working dog makes when a problem refuses to say its name. 6 years old and broad-shouldered, he looked sculpted from attention. The darker sable along his spine made a ridge of shadow, and when he paused, that ridge seemed to point, the way a compass points, not north exactly, but at something like truth. He lowered himself, one ear flattened to the floorboard, then lifted, then flattened the other, as if auditioning the house with each side of his skull. He did not bark, he did not growl. He accepted the sound and built a map inside himself. Ethan watched that attention and found his way back to breathing. Earlier, before the light went, he had stopped at the Havenwood Diner for coffee to go, and the memory of that small room came to him now, its checkered tiles worn pale at the doorway, the long chrome lip of the counter dulled by years of elbows and stories. The woman who filled his thermos had Sarah stitched in cursive on her apron, and something about the name suited her, simple, old, good in the mouth. She was taller than he expected, all clean lines and hollowed cheekbones, ropey forearms fitted to the labor of a lifetime. She wore her brown hair in a loose braid, threaded with gray strands, the kind of gray that made a person look like they'd been out in good weather rather than bad. Freckles were dusted across a sun-seasoned face, and small lines bracketed her eyes, laid there by squinting at distance and smiling at jokes no one remembered the next day. When she said, "Refill?" she made it a question people could answer. She had seen him look at the bulletin board beside the register, jobs, church suppers, a flyer about a lost orange cat, and she had gone back to her work without staring, which felt like a kind of gift. If she had an opinion on the man with the soldier's shoulders who asked for coffee and paid with bills that had been folded too carefully, she kept it to herself. Now, in the abandoned house, Ethan unscrewed the thermos and let the steam remind him of that brief human warmth. He drank, and the hum vibrated the liquid on his tongue. He moved to the wall again, knuckles rapping a slow code. Solid, solid, hollow, hollow. No, not hollow exactly, just different. He tried the crawlspace hatch and found it stuck. He pried it up with a flat bar, muscles flowing through the old choreography of leverage and patience. The space exhaled cold, dust rose and hung like a congregation of ghosts that had signed in early. Ethan lay on his belly, lantern pushed ahead, and slid into the narrow dark. The hum gathered itself under the boards and pressed his chest. He inched forward on elbows, paused to listen, then inched again, feeling more earth than air. Rex stayed at the hatch, forepaws planted at the edge, head thrust down to watch, the amber of his eyes catching the lantern's reach. The crawl space was a low-bellied maze of piers and stones, the house's tired logic laid bare. Here, a fieldstone stack, there a length of pipe abandoned without explanation. It smelled of clay and old water, of seasons that had come and passed without anyone noting their names. The hum grew, not louder exactly, but nearer, the way thunder grows by stepping toward you rather than shouting. When his elbow jarred a loose stone, the sound changed tone for a heartbeat, then found itself again. It was not electrical. There was a roundness in it that current never carried. He shut the lantern and waited, giving his ears to the dark. Still there, patient, implacable. He switched the light back on and reversed out, clothes salted with grit, hair marked by the crawlspace's signature. Standing in the front room, he dusted his palms against his jeans and looked at the wall as if it had given him a riddle, and in return, he owed it the courtesy of not guessing too quickly. He killed the breaker again out of principle and listened to the room breathe. Rex pressed his shoulder into Ethan's knee, a small insistence that felt like a nudge back into the present. The dog's listening had a shape. It faced the same run of wall, but seemed drawn toward the ground outside, as though what mattered were not the studs and panels, but something in the yard. On the porch, a rusted chain squeaked in a tired arc, and wind laid a quick hand over the roof. Inside, the note went on beneath both gestures. He ate his chili cold, because to fire up the camp stove felt like asking for the wrong company. A hot meal might bring memories to the table he hadn't invited. He wrote 3 lines on the back of a receipt. Breaker off, hum continues, strongest along library wall, crawl space vibration above ground, not pipe, and tucked the paper into the leather folder with his deed. In the corner of that very receipt, in a tidy hand he had not noticed at the diner, Sarah had written, "Welcome to Havenwood," and beneath it a phone number without a last name. It read less like a flirtation than like a neighbor leaving a candle where strangers could see it. He flipped the paper closed, unwilling to touch the idea of kindness too hard. He spread his jacket over the bedroll and lay down, boots still on, lantern turned low. The house answered with a series of organic noises it would make until its last day. Settling, yawning, remembering. It was not malicious. It was a living arrangement of tired materials. The hum threaded those sounds like a drone beneath a choir, sewing them into a single cloth. Ethan closed his eyes. The rotor thump had been like this. Regular, absolute, louder than thought. But the dog's breath near his ankle called him back from the edge of the remembered road. Rex lay between him and the door, paws crisp, chin on the floor, ears cycling their slow geometry. The dog's chest rose and fell in even measures, 6 counts in, 6 counts out. And Ethan found that his own lungs, disloyal lately, could be persuaded to keep time. He slept and woke and slept again, in the on-off rhythm of a man who had taught his body to survive without permission. And each time consciousness skated up through the dark, he felt the hum first, then the dog, then his own name answering to itself. There were times in the small hours when the sound deepened, and with it came images that always cued themselves in exactly the same order. Boots in dust, radio static, light tearing itself, then sudden blank. His fingers would twitch toward the rifle he no longer carried, but they would find instead the soft brim of Rex's ear, and the touch would turn muscle memory into ordinary touch again. In one of those wakings, he propped himself on an elbow, scanned the room, and saw through the cracked window a slice of yard gone black as a shut-eye. The hum made a shape in the glass. He imagined for a second that if he stood and went into that yard, he could put both hands to the ground and feel the pulse the way a doctor feels a patient's. And if he could feel it, he might understand it. And if he understood it, he might forgive something in himself he had not been able to reach. He lay back instead. There was a limit to what needed doing at midnight. This was the first lesson the house offered. Not every noise was a command. Toward dawn, the drone softened, or he softened to it, and the room took on the faint uncommitted light before color returns to things. Ethan knew better than to declare any victory in the gray, but he knew a truce when he felt one. Rex had not moved from the door, a quiet silhouette cut from attention, the profile of a guardian from some older story. The dog blinked at him, then closed his eyes again, deciding that morning would be allowed to arrive on its own. Outside, a truck passed on the road a mile away. The world had not ended in the night. Inside, the hum continued, but it no longer sounded like a threat. It sounded like a message whose language he did not yet know. He let his eyes close once more, and in that last small fold of night, with the earth speaking its one note and his dog listening to it on his behalf, Ethan slept the one good hour he needed to survive the day to come. Morning came quiet and gray, light combing the scuffed boards while the night's note lingered like a held breath. Ethan drained cold coffee, grabbed a mattock and trenching spade from the leaning shed, and cracked the back door. Rex was already there, taut, alert, then led a deliberate track along the rear foundation, nose skimming as if scent were a map. He stopped where grass darkened to sedge and moss, pressed one forepaw into the wet, and waited. Ethan crouched, his palm lifted damp and faintly iron-scented. The hum felt rounder here, not in the wood, but in the earth, as if the ground spoke from its throat. He set the spade. Heavy slices of black loam rose, a fine thread of water cooling his knuckles. He cut a neat ring of sod, saw at once the yard's natural fall toward the firs, and pictured a trench to teach the water its path. Rex settled 3 paces back, ears forward, tracking blade, mud, and the newborn glint pulsing in the cut. With each scoop, the sound underfoot loosened like a fist deciding not to close. The spade rang flat. Clearing with the pick, Ethan exposed a slab, broad as a small door, its face ochre slick. On one flank, he found a crushed length of clay drain tile, joints packed with silt. On the other, a crude collar of stacked fieldstone. Someone long ago had asked a spring to behave. Time had unlearned the lesson, and pressure had sung all night through the house's bones. He set the mattock as lever, gave the earth minutes of patience. The slab budged, sank, then budged again. A scrap of 2x4 wedged under the lip, a new angle, honest insistence, and it went at once, a wet sigh, a tilt, a dark mouth opening. Water shouldered through, not a boil but a generous pour, lifting silt in soft galaxies before clearing to the colorless certainty of a thing restored. It nosed the circle he'd cut, paused like memory, then chose downhill. Rex hopped back, then forward, head low, ears pricked, tail writing a small yes in the air. The hum eased, not vanished, but loosening, the way a word leaves a clenched jaw. Ethan widened the channel, carving a shallow V from Springmouth past the corner and down the fall. He braced the banks with stones, scavenged a rusted gutter as a temporary flume where the ground leveled. The earth drank what it needed, and the rest moved on. The smell shifted, less iron, more green. And even the back wall seemed to lift a fraction, perhaps only the mind remembering how to breathe without weight. He worked until shoulders and breath found the old rhythm called purpose. Sun shouldered up, insects changed key. A truck whispered along the county road and was gone. Along the fence, a dull flash resolved into a narrow orange cat with a torn left ear and a tail that kept its own rules. It watched from Blackberry Cane, stepped to a brief pool, drank twice, and withdrew with the precise dignity of the well-taught cautious. Ethan tipped his chin in greeting and returned to work. He slid into the crawlspace to test the foundation stones with his palms. The night's throb had thinned to afterimage, felt in memory rather than bone. Inside the library, he pressed both hands to the paneled wall, where chalk X's still ghosted the grain. The wood answered with ordinary talk, a dry pop, a thread of insect sound, a whispering sash, and no subterranean pulse. Quiet, unremarkable, exactly the kind a man can live within. Back outside, the stream kept the line he'd drawn like a bright sentence into the trees. He sharpened a bend, set another stone, and watched the water memorize him. Rex held his post, sphinx still at the border between trouble and cure, then nosing up a fist-sized rock as a volunteer offering. Dust and sun salted his flanks, and when he panted, the tongue flashed pink before he resumed that supervisory calm that makes attention look like wisdom. The machine calm in Ethan's head, the one tuned to the night's note, finally quieted. Water leapt a lip of clay and splashed his boots. The laugh that escaped him felt unplanned as a bird. He sluiced his face. The cold reset something behind his eyes. Gravel and perforated pipe could come later to give the stream a permanent spine. For now, he had given the earth room to carry what it was made to carry. He looked at his hands, dirty, nicked, honest, and at the battered house that seemed impossibly to lighten. He wasn't the kind of man who thanked wood, but he felt the structure grant a small permission, as if relieved of a burden it had never asked to hold. He whistled. Rex leaned hip to shin, the mute exchange of companions who have both done their part. Beneath his boots the ground no longer hummed. It listened. He stood with the shovel like a staff and watched the newborn thread of water slide into fir shade. Rex's chest thumping steady under his palm, a living metronome matching the easier beat in his ribs. The spring ran. The hum was gone. The house, and the man beside it, exhaled. Late afternoon softened into a cleaner quiet, the house lighter now that the spring ran free. The library, swept but mostly untouched, held one proud plane of dark paneling on the north wall, featureless, expensive once, secretive now. In that improved hush, a new center announced itself. Rex found it first. He padded over, set himself square, and pressed one ear to the wood with a working dog's grave attention. A soft whine left his throat. Not fear, not warning, but an invitation, as if whatever lived behind the timber might answer if a dog were polite enough. Ethan let the sight reset his priorities. Yesterday he might have waved it away. Today, after the freed spring, he recognized direction. "All right," he said quietly, "your way." He cleared the room, rolled a rug, shifted a chair, laid a canvas to catch dust. The panel ran 12 feet without a seam. He tapped with a screwdriver's hilt, listening for wood's small vocabulary, bright over studs, softer between, and here and there a pitch slightly wrong. Details began to misbehave. Finishing nails sat in countersinks that didn't match neighboring work. The stain was a half shade younger, like wood that had aged elsewhere and been replanted. Along the baseboard lay a thin tide line of plaster dust no broom had troubled. He held his knuckles an inch from the panel. A feather of air tickled the hair on his fingers. He cupped a candle flame and walked it slowly along the wall. At one point, the flame bowed, as if nodding to a seam he could barely see. Out came the tape. Inside, south wall to window, 12 feet 8. North panel to casing. 11, even. Outside, he counted clapboard courses and paced the spacing between windows. Back inside, the room came up short by a margin that mattered. Space was missing, 20 inches, maybe more, stolen from the library's skin. He wanted more proof and not guesswork. At Havenwood Hardware, he bought a stud finder, a slim inspection mirror, and a small punch bit, paying cash that made the register ring like a bell. The owner, Hal Rourke, late 50s, square-shouldered with a trimmed gray beard and rafter-burnished hands, listened all the way to Ethan's last word before answering. "If you're tapping old panel," he said, sliding the tool across, "go soft. Feel lies twice before it tells truth." He looked once at Ethan's palms, once at the quiet dog, and chose not to pry. He swung by the diner for a paper sack of sandwiches. Sarah handed it over with an unforced smile, freckles bright on sun-seasoned skin. "Don't work past tired," she said. "Walls talk louder when a man's hungry." He thanked her because anything more felt complicated. Back in the library, he ran the stud finder. The pattern was wrong for ordinary framing, a wide double at center, a suspicious gap, another double, as if someone had built a frame to hide a frame. He chose a low spot near the baseboard where a mistake would forgive easier, and the punch bit whispered through wood into air. He widened the hole to pencil width, slid the mirror in, and saw dust motes drifting in a dry, undisturbed void. No insulation, no wiring, just a cavity that had forgotten what day it was. Rex breathed at the hole and huffed the way a dog huffs when a smell is old. The soft whine came again, more agreement than plea. Ethan's pulse ticked once. He backed the mirror out. The wall wasn't a wall. It was a door that had forgotten its honesty. He penciled 6 marks, knee and shoulder height, where pitch changed and the stud finder hesitated. A level bubble hovered just off center, plumb enough for a lie. He could cut now, score a rectangle, pry, and let the room speak. But the spring had taught him to listen through, and the attic, if the house had kept its memory, might carry ink to match the feeling. He packed slowly, ritual cooling the part of him that wanted to force an answer. He ate half a sandwich standing, Mustard felt larger than it should. Outside, the new stream murmured like a satisfied thought. Inside, the library held its breath. Evening folded in. He set a cot near the doorway and left the floor before the panel clear. The lantern on low made the room something gentler than haunted, expectant. Rex resumed his post, ear to wood, eyes half-lidded in inexpensive vigilance. A stranger might have found it eerie. Ethan found it faithful. He wrote the facts plain, missing depth approximately 20-plus inches. Draft along north panel, cavity confirmed, no wiring, double studs, do not cut until attic checked. Writing made the wanting less loud. The house answered with old body talk. From above came a delicate shift, the tick a timber makes when temperature changes its mind. He pictured a box of schematics left in a mouse-chewed trunk, and the image arrived with more certainty than reason. Tomorrow, he said, a plan more than a hope. Rex turned his head, recognizing promise. The dog's breath settled to 6 by 6, and Ethan let his lungs borrow the cadence until thought thinned. He dreamed not of roads or blasts, but of paper, lines and measures, a small square inside a larger one, and the sound of a door opening without a hinge. When the lantern whispered and the stream kept its new grammar, the library stopped being a room and became a question. Ethan had chosen the shape of its answer. In the morning, he and the dog would climb. Dawn came thin and honest. The house felt lighter, as if yesterday's work had taught it to breathe. Ethan brewed coffee by the open back door, shouldered a flashlight, dust mask, and pry bar, and glanced at the library where the north panel held its silence. Rex sat facing that wall, ears half-cocked, guarding a promise made in the dark. The attic hatch's string was frayed. The ladder unfolded with an old joint's cautious groan. He climbed into dimness that smelled of insulation, paper, and a winter that never left. Dust fogged the beam. Shapes under sheets rose and fell with draft breath. Below, Rex's claws clicked in the hall, then stilled beneath the library. He took the space in small circles. A blackened oak trunk waited by the gable. A child's broken rocking horse leaned nearby. A jar of square nails turned to quiet stars when the light passed. He tested doubtful boards with the pry bar and adjusted his path. Houses confess if you give them time. Near the library line, the framing changed its mind. Rafters and joists met in a way that suggested a partition out of step with the room below. He brushed at lapped boards and found graphite. A rectangle in numerals, cursive initials, A.B., a date, 1909 or 1919. The ones disciplined, the nines proud. He eased the trunk, the hinge creaked, and learned his name. Inside lay quilts, a velvet-collared coat, and a parcel of papers tied with brittle twine. The twine crumbled. The top sheet was a blue pencil floor plan. He weighted corners with a jar of screws and the pry bar, and let the draft fail at folding it shut again. Rooms were named in a neat hand: parlor, kitchen, nursery, library, and there, tucked off the library's north wall, a 5 by 10 study, door drawn exactly where the present panel ran unbroken. Notes in the margin: private ledger, fireproof box, vent along chimney. In a finer, impatient hand: no servants here. Below, Rex barked once, declarative, and scratched 3 quick strokes against the panel. Ethan answered with a knuckle tap on a joist. Received. He aligned the blueprint with the joists, measured from the south wall to the window casing, then from the panel line to the north edge, and chalked the attic where the plan said door. He lowered his inspection mirror through a narrow slit. Air where lath and plaster should have been. Following the chimney, he found a small tin register, the vent in the note, now sealed with a nailed plate. His fingertip came away sooty. Whoever closed the study had planned it methodically and laundered the house's story flat. He sifted the trunk for proof. Onion skin receipts named Carpenter's, a tinsmith, and pay for a strong box. One invoice carried a flourish: Alistair B., wide loops, a small ink blob where the pen hesitated. He let the initials sit light for now and heavy later. Note: don't conclude. A thump at the hatch. Then Rex climbed with awkward grace, a companion refusing to be left out. Ethan steadied the rung and collar. The shepherd moved low on suspect boards and came to heel. "Look," Ethan said, laying the plan flat. The dog tilted his head, then walked the chalk and breathed long at the tin-sealed vent. Rex padded to the spot above the library's north wall and tapped his paw twice precisely over Ethan's mark, then pressed his ear to the boards and gave a small, confirming whine. Ethan didn't know how the dog knew. He accepted that he did. The blueprint, the chalk, the mirror, the dog, 4 witnesses, 1 story. He measured from chalk to hatch, then down the hall to the library, translating map to world. In the room below, the candle flame bowed where the plan drew a door. The mirror saw dark where plaster should be. Hair on his knuckles rose in the narrow seam the candle honored. The wall was not a wall. It was a door that had forgotten its honesty. He returned the blueprint to the trunk with a borrowed tenderness. He photographed chalk marks, set a level across joists to memorize spacing, and relatched the lid. Dust streaked his sleeve like a badge of admission. On the way down the ladder, he felt the quiet that follows when a question finally offers its outline. In the library, he smoothed the plan on the desk and looked up at the panel. Rex stood before it, chest low sound. Agreement, not impatience. Ethan wrote plainly in his notebook, attic confirms, study 5 times 10. Door 32 inches from window casing, chimney vent sealed, void verified. Proceed to cut, careful. He set the pencil down and chose patience over force. Outside, the trenching stream spoke its small, satisfied grammar. Inside, the hush held. Not a threat, but the particular silence of a secret just before it says its name. Ethan rested his palm where a latch should be. Rex sat, ears forward, a sentinel carved from attention. He let the urge to pry pass like weather. Tomorrow would be hinges and light. Tonight, they had enough. Proof the room existed, measures to find it again, and the steady breath of a dog who believed. The house did not deny them anymore. It waited. Morning gathered pale along the library windows. The chalk rectangle waited where last night's measures said a door should be. Ethan taped plastic to the shelves, laid a canvas, checked again for hidden wiring, and slipped soft wraps over Rex's ears. Close, but back, he said. The dog settled just outside the line, steady and expectant. He scored varnish with a utility knife, then traced the cut shallow with an oscillating saw. Between passes he listened. Wood told him when to slow down. At the final corner, he switched to a pull saw, honoring grain with hand and breath. Nails sighed free under a thin pry bar. Cold air slipped out. Dry paper, iron, and a century folded small. Behind the lifted panel sat the original door, hinges painted over, latch mortised and filled, strike plate gone. He teased out the hinge pins with a punch, talking to the metal under his breath the way you ask a stubborn truth to move. The slab relaxed inward. Dust fell like a veil. The hidden room opened, 5 by 10, paneled. A narrow desk, a leather chair cracked like summer clay, a capped vent by the chimney, 2 crates, and a black trunk scabbed with railway stickers. He stepped inside with the caution a man gives to memory. The ledger on the blotter was cloth-bound and olive. The trunk's leather handle creaked in his palm. The hasp lifted. Inside, older, larger bills, bank bands brittle as dry grass, coin rolls gone, fox brown. Beneath a fold of canvas lay an oilskin-wrapped journal. He sat because standing felt like raising a sail in a storm. The first page bore a sure hand. Silas Kane, May 12th, 1931. The voice that followed was polite and practical, and that politeness was the first cruelty. June 3rd, camp payroll at milepost 7. 2 men stood. 1 did not rise, cost written to wind. Ethan blinked. The entry did not mourn. It balanced. July 11th, church social money moved easy in rain. Ezra's boy held lantern, paid him $50, told him to forget. August 2nd, barn torched clean for the claim. Steer driven out first. No loss except timbers. Agent satisfied. September 19th, charge placed under driftwood at the ford. Wagon halted without a shot. The word charge hit Ethan in the chest like a hammer striking bone. He read on, and the ledger kept shedding kindness. Deputy O. Crowell takes envelope first Friday, speaks plenty, knows little. A B takes 30 of any hall that uses the mill road, pays the tinsmith, says secrets should be finished as furniture. In the margin, a small, neat diagram, door within a wall, payments to carpenters, a line to fireproof box, second crate. There were pages that tasted of prohibition, barrels run on timber spurs, night transfer by the river, pages that smelled of fear. Tom bled at the culvert, told his mother he left for Portland. Temptation walked in calmly. With those banknotes, he could frame a roof, seal windows, sleep without counting dollars into gas. The journal turned, the idea into a mirror, a man buying a future with the past's ruin. Then the charge under driftwood rose fully in his mind and became the road, the white-hot sky, the unbreathable second before the world folded. Rotor thump pressed against the room's silence. Sawdust turned to powder smoke. His hand betrayed him, reaching for a rifle that wasn't there. The trunk seemed to lean forward with its perfect bargain. Rex arrived the way a hand arrives on a shoulder. Quiet, necessary. Warm weight pressed Ethan's shin, then more pressure, deliberate and grounding. The dog's chest flowed 6 counts in, 6 counts out. Amber eyes fixed on him without judgment. Only presence. Ethan let his breath borrow the cadence. The edges of the room settled, floor under him, choosing to be floor again. He made himself read the worst page because hiding from it would grant it power. October 4th. Payroll car 3 miles north. Brakeman set a lantern and looked away. 2 men did not come home. We kept the road clear. It rained and washed the prints. The town called it fate. Ethan's throat held sand. 2 men. The count that lived behind his ribs. "I am not him," he said out loud to break the spell, to set his name separate from the books. He closed the journal, wrapped it back in oilskin, and spread the canvas over the money like a sheet over a body. He did not touch the bands again. The ledger he left open to the pages that would matter to people who make history out of harm instead of hiding it. He searched the crates with gloved hands and found the fireproof box, a steel tin with a soot-scabbed lid. Inside, receipts on onion skin, a tinsmith's invoice for panel reinforcement and vent plate, a carpenter's bill for false wall over Library North, a list of names paid for quiet. 1 chit bore the flourish Alistair B., and an amount that would have bought the library itself twice over. Method, not panic. Design, not accident. A small wave of rage lifted in him, clean and sudden, not at the dead men or even the nameless deputy, but at the ledger's tone, the way it made suffering into tidy arithmetic. Rage never served him in the field. Here, it clarified. If he took the money, he would be balancing the same book, writing in the same hand. Rex nudged his knuckles, bringing him back to the floor, to the dog smell of dust and old varnish and living breath. Ethan wrote in his notebook with a hand that grew steadier as the words took shape. Study opened, currency, Journal of Silas Kane, 1931-2, entries document payroll robberies, arson for insurance, bribery of deputy, explosives used at Ford, payments to A.B. for concealment, false wall, found receipts corroborating, do not disturb further. Next, photograph, secure, notify Historical Society. He underlined do not disturb twice, because men are weakest where they have just been strongest. He set the trunk lid down without a thump and stepped back into the library where the air moved again, fur from the trench door, coffee gone cool, a house learning to speak in ordinary noises. Rex sat and lifted one paw. Service question. Ready? Ethan nodded, ready to call to hand this to people who could carry it without becoming it. He framed the opening with temporary bracing, left the panel aside, secrets don't deserve new locks, and took photographs of the room from the threshold. Desk, chair, vent, trunk closed, ledger open to dates that meant widows. In the doorway he paused and let the feeling pass through him. Not triumph, relief. The moral kind that hurts a little. The way a setting bone hurts before it heals. He made his cot across the threshold, half in light and half in the study's cool shadow. Rex stretched over his boots, his familiar warm weight declaring watch. The ledger lay where a historian would find it. The money lay where a banker would count it. Both lay where a better town could decide. When Ethan closed his eyes, sleep came like a clean bandage. Morning lay clean across the floorboards, and the secret room waited behind its open frame like a truth that had stopped hiding. Ethan dialed the Havenwood Historical Society from the library desk, the ledger open where dates meant widows. He spoke plainly: journal, currency, a concealed study, a name, Silas Kane, and asked for someone who knew how to hold history without breaking it. Rex stood at his knee with the alert stillness of a dog who believes the next thing matters. Dr. Evelyn Reed arrived before noon, a sedan whispering into the drive, dust settling around a woman in her late 60s with a silver bob, sharp blue eyes behind rectangular frames, and a linen blazer the color of old paper. She moved with the deliberate care of a person who has spent years with fragile things. Her voice had university polish and small-town patience. She pulled cotton gloves from a worn leather satchel, along with acid-free envelopes, numbered tags, and a chain of custody form. "We'll do this right," she said, and Rex, deciding she was the right kind of careful, wagged once and sat. In the doorway to the study, she paused and listened the way Ethan had learned to listen, to what a room wanted to tell. She skimmed the ledger, then opened the oilskin journal on a foam cradle as if it were an injured bird. As she read, her mouth drew tight at certain entries: payroll robbery, arson for insurance, a charge under driftwood, and loosened at the margins that named payments to carpenters and a tinsmith. She looked up only once to meet Ethan's eyes. "You did the correct thing," she said, and set to work with a quiet efficiency that calmed the house. She photographed each page, logged each bundle, and called her deputy at the society to prepare a secure vault. For the currency, older, larger notes that would tempt the wrong kind of attention, she phoned the county and arranged a temporary seal and escort. Sheriff Lyle Bennett came in on that call, late 40s, tall, the kind of man who kept his uniform neat without shining it for applause. A dark mustache softened by laugh lines, and a habit of asking one more question than necessary. He stood in the library and took off his hat to speak, the old-fashioned courtesy that makes rooms feel safer. "We'll treat this as evidence until the society's vault is ready," he said, and when he saw Rex, he offered the back of his hand and a small smile. "Heroes' pay is stakes, I'm told." Word traveled as it always does, in murmurs at the diner, in texts leaping from phone to phone, in the bell of the Chronicle's door as a reporter pushed through. Sarah slid a paper sack of sandwiches across the counter, freckles bright against sun-seasoned skin. "You did the right thing," she said, the same words as Dr. Reed, different weight. She added 2 apple slices wrapped in wax paper for Rex, as though the dog needed sugar to keep listening. By late afternoon, Maya Flores from the Rios Havenwood Chronicle stood on the porch with a notebook and a camera strap across one shoulder. Mid-20s, short, dark hair clipped close at the neck, eyes quick with earnest curiosity. She wore thrift store boots and a denim jacket inked faintly by a past semester's stress. "I'm here to tell it clean," she said, and meant it. She asked about Rex first, training, age, what he does when the world gets loud, and then about the moment the wall told its secret. When Ethan ran out of words, Maya turned the lens toward Rex, kneeling to eye level, and the dog tilted his head with a veteran's patience. The shutter clicked once, respectful. The Chronicle's story appeared online by evening, and in print the next morning. The headline did something no one expected, and everyone agreed with: "The dog who heard the truth." Beneath it, a photo of a quiet shepherd sitting noble before a rectangle of air. Ethan in the background, with one hand on the frame, as if steadying the past while it climbed out. The piece credited the Historical Society, thanked the sheriff's office, and quoted Dr. Reed on the importance of primary sources to small-town history. It quoted Ethan exactly once. We listened. It quoted Sarah saying, "Sometimes a town needs a good dog to remind it how to hear." The town's weather changed. At the hardware store, Hal Rourke rang up a box of finish nails and slid a roll of blue painter's tape into the bag with a shrug that said, "Neighbor." In the post office line, Mr. Evans the realtor cleared his throat and delivered an apology that landed honest, his glasses slipping down his nose as if trying to hide from his earlier caution. At the market, a boy of 8 with a cowlick solemnly asked if he could shake Rex's paw. Rex obliged with regulation's gravity, then accepted a bandana the boy's grandmother had made, red with tiny white stars. Where strangers used to look away, eyes now met his and held for a beat longer, as if people had remembered the word welcome and were testing its fit. Ethan found that acceptance arrived in small domestic denominations. A neighbor woman he had not met set a pie on his porch and left a note that read, "For the dog's human." The mail carrier beeped twice at the end of the lane, the friendly code for happy news. After years of being weighed like bad weather, he felt the town's scale tilt toward him, not with fuss, but with a practical warmth that is safer than praise. He let himself enjoy none of it too much. Healing that depends on applause isn't healing. What he did enjoy, without reservation, was the drop in his shoulders when he walked Main Street and his body did not map exits. Dr. Reed convened a small meeting at the society. Oak table, glass cases, the air of careful work. She proposed a public exhibit called Hidden Room, Open Story, and asked Ethan for permission to display reproductions of select ledger pages and a photograph of the concealed door. She requested that Rex be present the opening hour as a living footnote, and the joke bent the room into relief. The sheriff agreed to a press window and a limited viewing of the trunk under supervision. A retired teacher offered to write plain language captions so that teenagers and grandmothers could read the same truth without losing any edges. Maya returned for a second feature, this time longer, with a sidebar titled How to Listen to a House. Stud finder, candles, measuring twice, drilling once. She included a box about service dogs and trauma, quoting a clinician in the next county, and ending with a single sentence of her own. Rex did not sniff out money. He pointed at conscience. The Chronicle's comments, usually a river that runs too fast, held steady and kind. Someone wrote, "I told my grandson to read this because this is what men look like." At the diner, breakfast tasted like a tradition, finding a new verse. Men who had rolled their eyes at ghosts now debated ventilation and false walls. Sarah leaned an elbow on the counter and asked Ethan if he slept any better. "A little," he said. She refilled his mug and said, "Little is where better starts." When Maya stopped by for quotes, she handed Rex a soft biscuit shaped like a bone and asked permission before she touched his fur, which is the kind of small respect that changes a town more than editorials do. Not every light was uncomplicated. A few cautious voices asked what this would mean for the Blackwood name carved into buildings. Dr. Reed answered with the steadiness of a person who sorts past from present for a living. "We will publish what happened and let the living choose what to do with the knowing." Ethan stayed out of that conversation. His job had been to open a door and hand the room to people who tell truths professionally. He was content to install temporary bracing, photograph pages, and step back. On the third evening since the story ran, a pickup slowed at the end of the lane, and the driver lifted his hand in an ordinary wave. Ethan raised his hand back without thinking, and in the unremarkable exchange felt something more durable than headlines settle into place. The stream he had freed whispered down the trench, a sound he now recognized as proof that pressure knows where to go when given permission. Rex lay on the porch with the red bandana at a jaunty angle and watched a pair of swallows stitch the sky. Not once did he scan the tree line for threats. Not once did Ethan. As twilight traded color for outline, Ethan sat on the steps and let the town's new weather soak him. He thought of the ledger's cruelty and the town's kindness, and how both could be true in the same square mile of earth. He put his hand on Rex's head and felt the steady metronome of a creature who does not read newspapers and does not need to. "We did the listening," he said, and Rex's ear flicked once, as if to say the obvious is sometimes the point. The man and... The dog sat like a small lighthouse at the edge of a place that had decided, finally, to be home. By the week's end, the house breathed differently, the way a chest loosens after a long cough. Morning slid across the library and paused at the opened frame, where the hidden study waited behind museum tape and temporary bracing. The trench murmured outside, a clear thread sewing the yard to the firs, and the old low hum had become merely the memory of pressure with nowhere to go. Ethan woke before alarms, sat up without checking exits, and found Rex already watching him with that soft, uncomplicated faith that made the room feel wider. Work turned from rescue to caretaking. Under Dr. Evelyn Reed's guidance, he built a shallow threshold so visitors could look in without disturbing the past. He planed cedar for a protective rail and polished the desk until the grain read like a story. The sheriff signed the last evidence forms and returned a copied ledger to the society's vault. In its place came placards in plain language about Silas Kane's ledger and the men who didn't come home. A neighbor answered the hammer's ring, Jonah Pike, early 50s, broad-backed, red beard salted at the chin, a Finnish carpenter whose quiet hands had framed half the porches in Havenwood. He measured twice, cut once, and spoke to wood as if it were an old friend who preferred truth. He had a limp you noticed only when he forgot to hide it. When Ethan asked, Jonah said, "Mill accident, year we lost the South Line," and left it at that. Life took on small human measures. At the diner, Sarah slid him a thick-cut sandwich and a heel of warm sourdough, her freckles brighter for being noticed. "You sleeping?" she asked, simple as asking about weather. "Better," he said, which was the honest size of it. She nodded as if better were sacred, added a paper-wrapped cookie with "For Rex" scrawled in blue ink, and changed the subject to how the high school shop class could build a proper display case if the society wanted. On Main Street, old men who had once arranged their faces like caution tried on a new expression and let it fit. The open hour was small and careful. Dr. Reed spoke first about primary sources and why towns must publish what they find even when it stings. Sheriff Bennett followed with a few quiet sentences about chain of custody and respect. Maya Flores clicked 2 photographs and put the camera down, content to listen. People filed past the library doorway to see the study's cool shadow: desk, chair, vent plate, trunk now closed and labeled, ledger facsimiles under acrylic. No one stepped over the rail. A boy of 8, the same boy with the cowlick and the starry bandana, asked if the dog could sign the guest book, and Rex offered his paw with professional gravity that made the room exhale into laughter. In that light, the word haunted lost its teeth, and another word took its place: kept. After the crowd thinned, casseroles appeared like weather. Someone left a quilt with pinwheels the color of rivers. Someone else fixed the squeak in the screen door without saying who. The stray orange cat from the fence returned, tail high, ear torn like an old map. It sat on the step and considered matters until a girl with paint under her nails christened it Copper. The cat stayed, not tamed so much as allied, patrolling the porch rail with the calm entitlement of things that have learned to survive and now permit themselves comfort. Night came without edge. Ethan turned the breaker fully on for the first time, and the house accepted electricity without the old protest. Light pooled in the kitchen and made the sink glow like purpose. He cooked an ordinary supper: eggs, toast, fried apples, and set a bowl on the floor where Rex preferred it. The dog took his time, unhurried for once. After dishes, he wrote a note he had been circling for years, but could never bring himself to begin. A letter to the families of the 2 boys from the road, not to rehearse apology, but to say what he wished he had said when words were a luxury. He did not send it. He put it behind the clock on the mantel and found that the room still felt easier for having heard it. Sleep arrived like a right he didn't need to earn. When dreams came, they did not commandeer him. They played water and cedar and a dog's steady breath under his hand. The familiar countdown, rotor, radio, light, blank, never started. In its place was the slow grammar of safety: wind in firs, stream on stone, Rex shifting once at the foot of the bed and resettling into 6x6. The house, no longer forced to hold a secret, found its ordinary noises and kept to them. He woke before dawn and walked barefoot through the library, the floor cool as a promise. The study's rail caught a line of early light and threw it gently against the far wall. Dust turned to small galaxies and then fell again, choreographed by air alone. He touched the post he had sanded, the smoothness that comes from work rather than from wishing, and felt gratitude as a physical thing, low and solid, like a well-built joist. He knelt by Rex and put his forehead against a broad skull that smelled faintly of cedar and sleep. "You rescued me," he said into one warm ear, and the dog, who had no need of sentences, flicked an ear once and pushed back. Around noon, Sarah parked by the lane and walked up with 2 to-go cups, breath white in the spring cool. "For the curator and the janitor," she smiled, handing him one and kneeling to straighten Rex's red bandana. "Town's different this week," she said. eyes on the house. You can hear it. He could. The difference was measured in how quickly engines idled at the stop sign, and how the bell at the Chronicle now sounded like an invitation rather than an alarm. It was in the way his shoulders forgot to climb and stayed where nature put them. By evening, Ethan had patched the last shingle over the library eave and set a new screen in the kitchen window, so that night insects would not mistake the light. For a sermon, he sat on the porch step with Copper to his left, Rex to his right, and watched swallows write the first drafts of summer across the sky. He thought of how the house had shifted names, from haunted to held, from hiding to keeping, from history's crime scene to history's witness. He considered the particular arithmetic of redemption and decided it worked best when it was paid forward in small currencies. A borrowed drill returned on time, a rail sanded smooth for a stranger's hand, a dog's patience at the exact second a man thinks he might break. When the first star shouldered through the remaining blue, he felt the smile arrive before he noticed he was making it. It wasn't a celebration, it was recognition. The worst things had not been undone, but they had been told out loud, and in that telling the room that had been a tomb became a place where air could move again. The old low hum, both in the house and under his ribs, was gone. In its place were two sounds that meant a future, the whisper of water in the trench and the unshowy rhythm of Rex's breathing. Ethan let the sounds braid themselves into a pledge and sat with it until night finished what the day had started. Sometimes God speaks not in thunder or lightning, but in the gentle footsteps of a dog, in the laughter of a child in the twilight, in the quiet courage of those who do justice. This story is not just about the child or the dog. It is about redemption, a redemption that seeps through the cracks of a broken heart and reminds us that no promise is truly lost when it is kept in love. Perhaps the real miracle lies not in the fire from heaven, but in the warmth of a rebuilt home, in the bond between a little girl and a fighting dog, in the whisper that says, "You are not alone." If this story touches your heart, leave a comment below. Tell us about a moment when you felt God put someone or something on your path. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to join our growing family of hope. And may God bless you and your loved ones with light in every season, even the coldest winter. Amen.